but I hope that whatever reason brought you here, God led you here so that hopefully you will hear something that can help you as you're on this journey called higher ed. And it is a journey. It's an experience, and it is a big part of your life that will shape the rest of your life. You know, we have all of these stages. We have our childhood stages, and then we have what I call our transition into adulthood stage, which is that time period from when we leave high school to when we figure out what it is we want to do when we grow up. Now, I will tell you this, it's okay to still be figuring out what you want to do when you grow up, when you're 47, like me. I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do when I grow up. But we all have to start somewhere. We all have to start with some career or some path where we evolve and learn our interests, and live in a society today where that can evolve until you're well up into your 70s or whatever. You can still be doing new and innovative things. So that's the great time we live in. And as she said, I stand here as a lawyer, author, done all these cool things, do great things. I was in New York yesterday. I mean, it's been quite a whirlwind of a life for me, but it wasn't always that way. I was born into a family where my parents were drug dealers. My mom and dad were drug dealers, and we lived in Huntsville, Alabama, in the housing projects, Butler Terrace housing projects there in Huntsville, for any of y'all that are familiar with Huntsville. And it's one of the most violent housing projects there in the city, next to Beaufort Court. And in that house with my mom and dad, who were drug dealers, there were 5 children, 5 of us, and we had 4 different daddies. And my mother had given birth to us from age 16 to 21. You do the math. So by all accounts, it was a very dysfunctional situation. And what was interesting was, when I say my parents were drug dealers, they were the real deal, because they had folks that worked for them. They had an enterprise that stretched all the way from Huntsville in Butler Terrace housing project across North Alabama over into Decatur, into some of the lower income neighborhoods over into Decatur, Alabama. So they were savvy people. They were very intelligent. They just used it in the wrong way, to hustle and to make money, unfortunately, by hurting people, because selling and dealing drugs is hurting people. And not proud of that, but I say that to say, my parents being such smart people that they could manage this enterprise, be brave enough to withstand all the dangers that come with being leaders in a drug cartel thing like they were doing, savvy and negotiate with folks that were bringing in and trafficking drugs from other places across the country, having these people that were under them, that they had them beholden to them, willing to go out and do the dirty deeds of standing on the corners and leaning over in the cars selling drugs. Well, you think about that. Let's think about that for a second. Sounds like the skill sets of CEOs to me. I mean, if you really think about it, think about what they did, all the stuff they had to calculate and figure out and maneuver and organize and build morale to get people to continue to follow them. That's exactly what CEOs do when they run a corporation with people under them. So what could my parents have done had they used all of those great skill sets that they had for something good? They could have been on the track to something amazing. Clearly, I think sometimes a lot of this stuff is genetic. I mean, they pass something down to me, being intelligence. The difference is in what you do with it. And that's what I want to talk to you today about. I want to talk to you about choices, because we all have choices. No matter what our circumstances are, at the end of the day, it's your choice. When I talk to kids, I look at them very harshly and I say, you have absolutely no excuse not to be successful. And I'm like, and I'll say, I don't care what you're going through right now. And the reason I can say that with the authority that I can say it with is because of where I've been. And the choices that I had to make, albeit hard choices sometimes, but the ones that I had to make when I made the decision that I was going to define who I wanted to be as an adult. I was not going to let my circumstances, my family life, who my parents were, whatever I'd been through, define who I chose to be as an adult. And now on the other side of all of this, I have this beautiful family, great husband who's a school teacher, and my 3 beautiful kids. I have a daughter who's a freshman in college at Auburn. I have a daughter who's in the 10th grade in high school at Chilton County High. And then I have a 3-year-old. Y'all can laugh about that. We call that a uh-oh. Man, I can't tell you that was planned. But I promise you, if that happens again, somebody's getting sued, because we took care of that. We closed that shop down, out of business. But don't know what I'd do without him, though. I mean, he has been quite a joy, the little surprise of the family, but such a blessing at the same time. And so on the other side of life, I get to enjoy this beautiful, wonderful life with my family, something that I could never have even begun to imagine, as a child, because of the situation I was in. Now, what was interesting was, even though I was in this situation with my parents who were drug dealing and all the violence going on, there were guns in the house, drugs on the table, money everywhere and all of that stuff, there's something about children that God does that is really a blessing to them. And he coats them with this shield of innocence. I don't know anything about anybody's family life that's out there, but there's something about, and if you've seen any kids like this that are in a home where there's a lot of turmoil and bad things going on, you still see little kids that are happy, right? They're still just running around playing, acting like nothing's going on. You know why? Because I think God has equipped them with that level of oblivion that makes them not even really be aware of how dangerous the situation is around them, so that they can grow and thrive. And that's kind of how I was. I mean, I was, I had both of my parents were in the house. I didn't know they were drug dealers. I didn't know they had this strained relationship and doing all these things that they were doing. And guess what? As a little kid, I didn't care. I didn't care. They were my mom and dad. I loved them. My siblings, I didn't know we had 4 different daddies and all this stuff. I didn't care. They're my siblings. They're my brother and my sisters. I loved them. I didn't care about all that stuff. I'm a kid. And we had all the stuff we could want. We had toys and themed bedrooms and all of this stuff. I had no idea it came from drug money. I had no idea it came from an enterprise that hurt people the way they did. But I was a kid. I mean, I just didn't care. I just being a happy kid. But we all know, whenever you have that level of dysfunction, eventually something's going to happen, right? Because that dysfunction can't just sustain itself forever. You can't be in this violent, drug-dealing, dangerous world forever and nothing ever happens. I mean, I don't know about y'all. I don't know any drug dealers that are retiring with their 401k, retirement plan. I mean, it doesn't work that way. Eventually, something happens, and my parents were no exception. So when I was 5, my dad got busted for dealing drugs, and he went to prison. And while he was in prison, my mom was trying to hold down the drug business herself. And in doing so, she broke the cardinal rule of drug dealing. She started using their product, heroin, and she became a heroin addict. And for reasons unknown to me to this day, one day my mom woke up, got us up, she packed up all of our clothes. This was the end of the summer, so it wasn't unusual for us to go stay with a grandma or cousins or something like that for periods at a time. So she packed up our clothes. She took me and my younger sister down to Clanton, Alabama, where I live today, a little small rural town with the Peachwater Tower off of 65. She took us down there to my paternal grandmother's house, my dad and mom's house, and my paternal grandmother lived in the housing projects down there in West End in Clanton, and she was dirt poor. She had left a very abusive marriage from her husband, and she was raising the last of their 8 children on her own, cleaning houses for a living, trying to make ends meet. So my mother left us there. Then she went back to Hueytown, Alabama, and she left my middle sister at an aunt's house, and she went back up to Huntsville and left my only brother and my oldest sister at her sister's house, and she went back to Bowler Terrace to that housing project we lived in, and she went upstairs to her bedroom, took out one of her guns, and committed suicide. So now I do know I'm in dysfunction, but I learn about it in such a harsh way. Because I wasn't in an environment where adults sat down and talked with you and helped you work through your grief and explain things and help you cope with anything. I was in a situation where I was just kind of figuring things out myself. And on top of that, I overheard grown folks saying things like, what was she thinking, getting strung out on those drugs like that and stringing all these children across the state for everybody to have to deal with, and then there's sorry daddy, he's in and out of jail and he ain't going to be able to help us and blah, 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 blah. This is what I heard. And when you hear stuff like that from grown folks, and you're just a tender, small 5-year-old kid, what do you start to think? You start to think, we're a burden on people. You know, nobody really wants us. And so my whole demeanor started to change. I started to do something that some of you may have seen young kids do in a bad situation before. I started acting like a mama to my 3-year-old sister. You know, when you're in that dynamic, you feel like you're kind of all each other has, and you kind of have to protect. The older sister had, or older brother has to protect the younger siblings. And I started acting like that. And that's not fair at 5 years old. But that was my situation. So there I was, you know, in that situation. And if that wasn't enough to deal with, within a month of me moving into that house with my grandmother after my mom committed suicide, one of her adult sons started to sexually abuse me on a regular basis. So there I was in the lowest point of my life at 5 years old. I mean, my mom committed suicide, my dad was in jail, I'm separated from my siblings, I'm really experiencing poverty for the first time really being poor. Because, you know, in a drug dealing house, there's money everywhere, there's food and stuff, and I just never really thought about not having anything. And now all of a sudden in my grandmother's house, who lived in the projects, worked hard, cleaning houses for a living, she had to have government assistance to make ends meet. And back then, you didn't get an EBT card and got to go to the store like everybody else. If you got food assistance, it was food assistance. You had to go to the county department at the first of the month and stand in line and get blocks of government cheese, bags of flour. I mean, I remember that. I remember us standing in line to get food that we were going to need to make sure we had meals on the table before the month closed out. I remember that. And that was tough for me. And then to have to go through the sexual abuse, it's a whole nother level. And I wasn't able to tell anybody at the time because my perpetrator threatened me then. And being a young, impressionable kid, I was scared. And I didn't say anything. And so that was my condition. That was my life. And it was dark. It was miserable. There was nothing pleasant about it. But then God clearly had to do something because I'm standing here in front of you today in spite of all that. In spite of becoming this child in the midst of all that darkness, walking slumped over, holding my head down, mumbling when I talk, not making eye contact with people, going into a shell. That was the condition that I was in during that time. But God used something to help me. And let me just say this at the outset of this. I am going to talk about God for me personally. I'm not speaking on behalf of Wallace Community College when I do this. This is Liz Huntley's personal message. And it's my faith, and it's what I believe. I often tell people, if you don't want me to talk about God, you need me to come speak. Because there's no way I can share my story with you without giving credit to the one I believe got me where I am today. And the way he did it is he used something that he's been using since as far back as history can reach back to the early churches. He used education. Education is the great equalizer. You know, my grandma used to say, people can do a lot to you, Elizabeth, but they can't take your mind. That's yours. You own that. That belongs to you. Your mind and what you choose to do with it is your choice and how you tend to utilize it. Now, I know that you all are blessed before I even walked in this door. Why? Because you're at a college. You're enrolled in classes. You're in an environment where you're surrounded by advocates that care about you, where you have resources, where you have people that you can go to help you navigate through this thing that you're trying to figure out in terms of where you want to go as an adult. So you're already blessed before I even walked into the door. But I want to talk to you a little bit about how education is such an equalizer. You know, we talked about my book, and what it is, it's just a collection of stories of how through every phase of my life, there was always somebody there placed in my path that God used to help me navigate through another little stage of life. Because we have all these little bitty stages, right? In between the big stages of how we get from point A to point B. And that's how it was. Education is the great, great equalizer. So let me tell you what happened. So when by way of background, in my grandmother's community at the time, we were going through the early stages of integration. And the all-black school had closed down in West End, where my grandmother lived, and all the black kids were being bused across town to what had been the all-white school. And so several of the black teachers lost their jobs and weren't able to find employment. So there were some ladies at a Union Baptist church that decided, you know what? We're going to make sure our kids are ready to go to school when they go across town. So they got a grant, community action grant, and they opened up a preschool. And they opened up this preschool in the Fellowship Hall of Union Baptist Church, there in the community, a place I could walk to. And they hired some of the teachers that had lost their jobs in the middle of integration. And so you have to know a little something about my grandma to know why I was definitely going to go to this preschool. There were 4 things about her. She never said them, but y'all know about grandmas, right? There's certain little things about them in practice that are just classic to your grandma, right? So 1, we went to church every Sunday. Door open, we were there. She believed in being in church. Number 2, she believed in minding your elders. I don't know about how you are with your grandma, but I didn't play with my grandma. I didn't dare cross her. She meant business. And number 3, she believed that you were clean. You know, we may have lived in the housing projects, but you could have eaten off our floor. That's how clean she was. And she had this saying, she said, clean don't cost a dime. Anybody can be clean, right? So anybody can be clean. That don't cost any money to be clean. And number 4, she believed that you get an education. She understood the power of an education and what an equalizer it was. And like most people in America, she believed you get an education by sending your kids to school and you hope for the best. And so she heard about this preschool opening and told me, Elizabeth, you're going to that school. Yes, ma'am. So I get up that morning, and I remember that first day of school like it was yesterday. And y'all know my condition. I was walking slumped over. My head was hung. I didn't look up and make eye contact at people. I was walking down to this school, and I remember being so scared. I remember being so scared, maybe how some of you were when you first walked on this campus, about this new experience, this new place I was going, and how people were going to respond to me. I was scared. I was scared how I was going to do in this school. I mean, it was scary, and I was nervous. And I was scared about my situation too. It was a small town, so everybody knew everybody's business. You know, small like Hansville. This isn't a big city, and everybody knows everybody's business. So I was ashamed and embarrassed by my situation. I was embarrassed that my mama was a drug head and had committed suicide. I was embarrassed that my daddy stayed in and out of jail and everybody knew it. I was embarrassed that we were so dirt poor and the kids made fun of us. And even though I had not told anybody about the sexual abuse at the time, I was embarrassed about the filthy stuff that was going on in my home that nobody knew about. There's something about a kid that's sexually abused. You walk around with this cloak of shame that even though people can't see it, you feel like they see it, you know, and that was my condition walking down to that school. So I go into the school, and I stood at it was in the fellowship hall of the church, so at the top of the stairs. I'm standing at the top of the stairs, and I remember looking down and looking over the room, and I kind of smiled. And the reason I kind of smiled was the same reason I smiled when I walked into this building today, Karen. I smiled because it was so beautiful. Don't you know that when somebody takes the time to invest the resources, the money, and the time to develop an environment for you to learn in that's beautiful and comfortable and inviting like this, it is a true blessing. And you should be thankful for it. There are not many small towns in the state of Alabama, and I've been in a lot of them that has a community college like this. This building looks better than some of the buildings in Auburn, at Auburn University. I mean, it's a beautiful place. And that's sort of how I felt. I walked into that preschool that day, and it was just so pretty. And for me, being a kid that lived in cinder block walls and concrete floors and dirt for grass in my front yard, to be in that pretty place kind of made me smile. But when those preschool ladies came up to me and put their arm around me and said, "Come on in here, baby," I almost cried. because for the first time in my little fragile life, I felt the nurturing touch of an adult, and I melted under it. So for those of you in here that are even thinking about education, it is the ministry of all ministries of profession, because it actually impacts human capital and a human life. For those of you in nursing, you're going to see things in a setting, if you make contact with children, where you're going to have the opportunity to take action to impact their life. People that do things that intersect with children, you have the opportunity to impact their life in the smallest of ways sometimes. And so I melted under that. And not only did those teachers bring me in and embrace me, but they would get down on their knees and they would call me by my name and look me in my eye and call me by my name. You nurses, that's powerful. You know, so many kids come into situations with people outside of their home where they're used to their name being called in a commanding way. Lisbeth, put up the dishes. Lisbeth, go to bed. Lisbeth, get dressed. And it is so nice and almost therapeutic to get in an environment where somebody calls you by your name in a loving voice that's kind when you need it the most. So I learned real quick in this preschool that if you do really smart stuff, they'll really love on you. And if you do really, really smart stuff, they'll give you prizes and stuff that you can take home. So I thought, well, this is a good gig. You know, if I just do all this little smart stuff they give me and I get prizes and stuff, you know, it's a good gig. That's what I did. In fact, I did so much smart stuff that I ended up being valedictorian of my kindergarten class. And I wasn't even trying to be valedictorian of my kindergarten class. I really wasn't. I was just responding to the love from those teachers in that preschool. And I had no idea at the time what God was doing. Just like many of you may not realize what God may be doing for you by having you here, giving you that solid foundation that you don't even know how to appreciate and understand it yet until you get out in the real world and you have to apply it. And then you're thankful for it. Because that's what happened to me. After I left that preschool, the big day came for me to have to go over to the public school in the middle of integration. No offense to some of you in the room, but to be around white folks for the first time. I mean, I grew up in a very secluded, racial secluded environment. I wasn't around white people other than I went to clean houses with my grandmother, or we went to town. And so I get up that morning, and this is where you really find out what you're made of. When you get in a situation where you have to move forward in spite of the mountain, where you have to decide, okay, I'm going to suck this up. I'm going to dig in and get these calf muscles ready, because I'm going to climb. And I'm not going to let this mountain stand in my way. Because here's what happened to me. So I get up that morning, I eat my breakfast, put on my little clothes, and my grandmother looks at me and she says, Elizabeth, I want you to go down to that school and I want you to tell the teacher to put an X everywhere I need to sign on the paperwork, send it back home, and I'll send it back tomorrow. So it dawned on me, my grandma's about to send me to this school by myself at 6 years old, going to the first grade in the middle of integration. Y'all, I was terrified, but I was more scared of my grandma, so I got my butt on that bus to go across town, because I didn't play with my grandma. So I get on the bus, and I remember this like it was yesterday. Y'all, it can be so scary going into the unknown, not knowing what to expect, because nobody's been there before. Nobody's telling you what to expect. You don't have a support system that's getting you there and walking you through it. You just got to step out there by yourself and just go for it. And so I get on this bus, and y'all, I'm scared. I mean, in Clanton, I don't know about Hansfield, but in many southern towns, the railroad tracks is sort of the great divide. On the west side of the railroad tracks, you got West End, and on the east side, you have town. And so I'd never forget when the bus was crossing across those railroad tracks, and I was sitting there and bouncing to that bus across the railroad tracks. My heart really started to race. I got real nervous. And we get down to the school, and I walk in. I don't have a clue what to do. But I look on the wall, and I see first grade. And I thought to myself, well, I'm going to first grade. I must be in the right place. Well, how did I know it said first grade? We didn't have any learning going on in my house. That wasn't the way we rolled in my home. I knew it said first grade because of that preschool. Education creating opportunity to be an equalizer. So I stood there a little longer and didn't know what to do, but parents were coming in with their kids, and they had all these sheets of paper on the wall. And the parents would scroll down the little sheets of paper until they would find their child's name. And they would say, oh, little Susie, you're in such and such a class. So they would go off into the module where they're supposed to go. Well, I thought to myself, well, my name's got to be up there. I'm going to the first grade. So I got on my tippy toes and I scrolled up and down that list until I found my name and I saw what room I was supposed to go into, and I headed that way. Now, how did I know how to read and spell my name? How did I know how to identify room numbers and move from room to room? Because of that preschool. Once again, education being the great equalizer. So I go into the classroom and I sit in the very front desk, because the ladies at the preschool said, don't nothing good happen in the back of the classroom. When you get your butt over there, you better sit in the front desk. So I did. No offense to you folks in the back of the room. So I sit in the front desk. Now, y'all go back in time with me if you would. Now, I'm there. I'm in the classroom. You know, that mountain is in front of me, and I'm just taking step one foot in front of the other, trying to get where I need to be, you know? And I'm sitting there in the front of that classroom now. Y'all know about the first day of school. It doesn't matter if you're white, black, rich, poor. The first day of school is anxiety for everybody, right? It's nervous and scary for parents and kids because it's a new thing. And so here I am sitting there in that desk. I guess I'm sitting up waiting on class to start. I don't know what I was thinking. And all this stuff is going on in the room. You got little Johnny in the corner crying. You got little Susie don't want to leave her dog. You got this mama asking 50 million questions with all this paperwork. Y'all know the scene in the classroom on the first day of school. And so all that's going on, and I'm just sitting there. Well, eventually the teacher started to walk towards me. And when she did, I have a little bit of a confession to make. This lady started walking towards me, and she had this dark hair and these beautiful colored eyes and this pretty smile. And y'all, she looked just like Wonder Woman. I am not kidding you. She looked like Wonder Woman. And I'm talking about the old school Linda Carter Wonder Woman. Because back in the day, to give away my age, there used to be a Wonder Woman show that was on TV. And in that show, Wonder Woman would have on her plain clothes, and she'd be going on about her little regular day, and then somebody would need to be saved, and she would spin around and change into her little Wonder Woman outfit and have her gold cuffs and her robe and go take care of the bad folks, right? So I'm only 6, and being a victim child, I used to think one day Wonder Woman was going to come and save me from the bad people, right? So when this teacher started walking towards me, I thought in my little mind, could this be? Is my teacher Wonder Woman? Like, how cool would that have been? Well, it wasn't Wonder Woman. It was Miss Pam Jones, who was my Wonder Woman. So let me tell you what happened next. This is the reward of embracing your education and using it. It's one thing to get an education, but then you've got to use it. You've got to apply it. And I promise you, when you know how to combine those two things together, God will open doors for you that you never imagined. So she comes towards me and she says with that lovely voice, well, hello, young lady, what is your name? Well, y'all, I panicked. I didn't know what to do to register myself for school. So all that could come out of my mouth was, my name's Elizabeth Humphrey. My grandma told me to tell you to put an X everywhere she needs to sign on the paperwork, send it back home, and I'll bring it back tomorrow. I just spit it out. I had rehearsed what she told me over and over and over again. Those were the instructions she gave me to go to school. And so Miss Pam Jones paused, and we had an exchange, a conversation about how I found my way into that classroom. Now, you all know a lot of things could have happened in that moment. Miss Pam Jones could have called DHR. And God rest my grandmother's soul, I will love her to the day that I die. But she was wrong to send me to school that day by myself. Sometimes we are in families where we're not really raised the way children should be raised. And we have to deal with things that children shouldn't have to deal with. And that's not fair, but it's not an excuse to not have a great quality of life for yourself as an adult. So Miss Pam Jones could have said, I don't have time to deal with this. You need to go up to the principal's office and let Miss Charlotte, the guidance counselor, figure out what to do with you. Well, that would have been terrible. That would have made me feel bad about myself, and I'd just sit up at the office all day, and DHR would have come, and it'd been a terrible day. Or Miss Pam Jones could have done the worst thing that could have happened to me. She could have been one of those teachers that brought her own personal bias into the classroom. And I don't mean racial bias. Whenever I say bias, I'm talking about there's some teachers in the classroom that don't need to be there because they have hang-ups about children by who their folks are, what neighborhood they live in, or what church they go to, or a bunch of different reasons, or they show favoritism to their best friend's kid, and all of these dynamics that aren't fair because they should treat all the children the same. And she could have been one of those teachers and could have said, you know, oh, this is one of those children, and sort of pushed me off in the back of the classroom and I became invisible. That would have been the worst thing that could have happened to me. But Miss Pam Jones saw my glass as half full and not half empty. Let me tell you about people that go through adversity and overcome it. The strength that's gained when you have to deal through a tough thing and push forward and keep going in spite of it is a recipe to success that people can't manufacture, they can't teach it, they can't instill it in you. You either have it or you don't. And people that have it, their glass is half full because even if they're going through a bad situation, they got that resilience, that strength, that whatever it takes to keep moving forward in spite of that mountain in front of them and keep going. And that's what she saw. She saw a resilient child. She saw a brave child. She could have seen my glass as half empty. She could have seen my glass with the bad stuff, this kid ain't got no parents, his grandma sent her to school by herself this day and all of that. But she saw the good stuff because she recognized that those things are things that she can't teach. And because I had them, and I had a little bit of intelligence to figure out my way into the room, that she could teach me a lot and only hope that I'll keep that resilience to get through the rest of my life with all the challenges that were ahead. And that's what happened. So Miss Pam Jones, with tears in her eyes, looked me down in my face and she said, Elizabeth Humphrey, you're going to be the brightest student I ever have. Now, how powerful is that? That is what happens when you use your education and what God has blessed you with, and you demonstrate that you're going to use it to the best of your ability. I promise you, people will notice. People in your profession will notice. Your teachers will notice. And they will reward you for it. And so Miss Pam Jones said that to me. Now, I'll be honest. I was only 6 years old. I didn't get the magnitude of the situation. So I thought in my little head, oh, well, I guess this is like preschool. If I just do smart stuff, she'll keep loving on me, right? And that's what I did. I did smart stuff in her class. By the time I left first grade, I was reading on a third, fourth, and fifth grade level. I was doing math on a second and third grade level. But most importantly is I responded to what she had to offer me. And I took advantage of it. That was my choice. That was the choice that I had to make. And I did. Now, I will say this. Miss Pam Jones is still loving on me to this day. When I gave birth to my second child, she was at my house keeping my first child. And even when I gave birth to that little caboose surprise, she was the first person in the driveway. Now, she may have been there because she was like, I want to see this for myself. Did she really just have a baby at her age? But she was then and always will be my Wonder Woman. I mean, her birthday was yesterday, and we celebrated and got her favorite plant and all of that. I mean, she's a wonderful person and made an impact on my life. So I tell you that story about kindergarten, even though we're here on a college campus, and what I'm telling you is it doesn't matter. That story is applicable at any stage of your life because it's about using what God has given you, using those resources, those tools, what you've learned, what you've taken in, and using that to the best of your ability to go to the next step. That's the key. That is the key. And that's the way it was for me the rest of school. There was always somebody there to help me along the way. Because I learned real quick that if you ask, you might be surprised at how much people are willing to turn around and help you if you're willing to help yourself. And then I'm going to close with this, and I'll be happy to answer a few questions if anybody has any questions in the audience. Because this is important to me to share this part. And it's always difficult to share this part, but it's important. By the time I got to the 3rd grade, things in my house had gone from worse to worse. At this point, my grandmother had another son, adult son, that had moved in with us, and he was discharged from the military. He had some kind of mental issues that we didn't know about, and back then, I mean, they don't do what they should do for our veterans today, but back then it was really bad. I mean, veterans came home, families just had to deal with it, whatever the circumstances were. And so he had a lot of mental issues, and he would try to be on his medication, and then he would fall off the wagon, and he would get really violent. And the violence would get so extreme at times that our neighbors would have to call law enforcement. And he would get knives out, threaten to kill us if we went to sleep. It was just almost a war zone place to live in, living with his level of mental illness. It was a struggle. And so by this point, I kind of started to get angry. By 3rd grade, you're 9 years old. You're starting to understand and process things at a different level. And I'll never forget, and the sexual abuse was still going on. And so I'll never forget the last day of school of 3rd grade for the summer. Unlike my children, whose summer is already planned out, we've already got camps planned out and paid for, and vacations and everything that we're going to do, my summer was going home to my house 24/7 for 2.5 months. There were no trips, no vacations, no camps, none of those kinds of extracurricular activities that my kids get to do. It was just being in my world 24/7, which was not a pleasant world. At least during the school year, I had the buffer of school. I had 8 hours a day I was in school, kind of away from all of that. And now I'm in it all the time. The sexual abuse any time of the day. The violence from the uncle erupting any time of the day. The poverty, all of those things. All of that going on 24/7. So on that last day of school of 3rd grade, I got on the bus and I sat there, and as the bus was pulling away from the school and I saw my school fading in the distance, I started to cry. And I didn't just cry, I wept. I really cried hard. And I cried because I was so angry about the hand I had been dealt, about my situation, about my life. And I was angry that I was leaving my school. It was the one place where no adults hurt me. It was the one place where I got to learn and my mind was stimulated. It was the one place where I knew we were going to have a meal every day. No question about it. A meal was going to be there. It was the one place where I got to be a kid. And so I sat there on that bus and I just cried. And I went into this Great Depression. And, with the situation I was in, it's like, what's the point, living in that situation? And went into this depression. Well, 2 weeks after that, my Aunt Liz invited me to this church with her. And I'll be honest, y'all know I went every Sunday with my grandma, but I really didn't have a relationship with God because, my grandma's church, they didn't have children's church, they didn't have Bible school. So you sat in the adult service, and the preacher would get so animated, the ladies would get so emotional, I didn't know what they were doing in there. I just sat there and went to church every Sunday. Didn't have a clue. Well, she invited me to this church with her, and it was a Wednesday night Bible study, and I went with her. And I didn't go because I was going to learn about God. I went because it got me out of my house, and it got me out of my house at night when the bad stuff happens. So I go to this church with her, and we sit down in this little church, and the very first thing the preacher says is, okay, I want everybody to get out your Bibles, and if you don't have one will be provided to you. Well, that was different. Nobody had ever asked me to read the Bible before, but because of school, I could read, and I could read well. And thank God I could read, because they gave us the King James version of the Bible. And I don't know if y'all ever read that, but that's a challenge right there by itself. So they handed us these Bibles, and we started reading all these stories of hope about this God that helped all these people come out of all of these things. And we ended that night in the book of Genesis with the story of Joseph. And you people of the faith out there know about the story of Joseph. You know, Joseph was, he was in a dysfunctional family if I ever saw one in my life, right? I mean, they were a hot mess. Joseph had all them brothers. They had a bunch of different baby mamas. Joseph was the baby. He was Daddy's little favorite. Daddy bought Joseph this coat of many colors. Joseph strutting around in his little coat in front of his brothers. The brothers get so jealous of him, just furious at him. And then that boy has a dream that he's ruling over his brothers and everybody. And he wakes up and he's bragging about the dream and talking about what he had dreamed that he was going to do. And those boys get so mad at that little boy that they take him out into the woods and sell him off into slavery in Egypt and go back and tell the daddy that the boy had gotten killed. Now that's trifling. You know, today we would call that human trafficking, wouldn't we? And so the boy ends up going into prison, and he's beaten in prison, and all this stuff happens to him. And then the government finds out this kid can interpret dreams. So the government gets him out of prison, and they're using him, working in the government. But the boy is an honest kid because he loves the Lord. And so this woman tries to have an affair with him, and he doesn't do it, so she lies on him. So the boy goes back to prison. And then he's in prison again, and I'm sitting there reading that story like, oh my goodness, this is terrible. But at the end of that beautiful story, God had elevated Joseph, after all of that, as governor of Egypt. And in that capacity, not only did this same Joseph that went through all of that terrible stuff, not only did he save his family from famine and starvation, he saved 2 nations from famine and starvation. And I'm sitting there, and I'm reading this story, and I'm thinking, if this God can help Joseph, and he went through all of that bad stuff, maybe this God can help me. So that night I leave that Bible study, and all I can think about is that book, those stories of hope that's in that book. And so I go back the next Wednesday. My Aunt Liz doesn't even have to ask me. And we go through several scriptures of hope again. And we ended that night in Matthew 6:26. And I'll paraphrase. It says that if God will take care of the fowls of the air, and they neither sow nor reap, then he'll take care of his children. Are they not better than a bird? And what does all that mean? You know, they don't sow or reap. Birds, they don't store anything up. They don't have little places they live. I mean, they have nests where they're born, but, you know, they're migrant. They're always on the move. And the preacher said, you know, if God will take care of the birds and make sure they have, then surely he'll take care of his children. And if you think about it, birds have more faith than us humans do. Birds are like, I mean, you know, that's why they tweet all the time. I mean, birds are like, I'm not worried about nothing. Because them 2-legged human people, they going to build bird baths. They going to build bird houses. They going to do all their landscaping around us. They going to get books and look at us and get binoculars out and look at us and stare. They're going to be in the park with their little food, and they're going to see us, and they can't help themselves. They got to give us some of their food. I mean, why are birds worried about anything? They're like, I ain't worried about nothing. Those 2-legged human people are going to take care of us. And y'all all know y'all are guilty of helping a bird out every time or two in your life. You know you have. But so if God will equip us to be concerned about a feathered fowl, surely he'll equip us to take care of his children, his little ones, his least. And so he went on to say that. Now, here was the tragedy in that moment. And here is where, and I've done this presentation from New York, Rhode Island, all the way over to Seattle, Washington, in different versions for different audiences. But I always end here because it's probably the most important point in my life. Because the tragedy in that moment, and y'all bear with me here, because it's tough every time, is I sat there with everything that was going on in my life, and I questioned whether or not I was more than a bird. I questioned whether or not a bird had it better than I did when I was looking at my situation. and what was going on in my life that I couldn't help because I was a kid. Then the preacher said this. He said, you know that you're more than a bird because God will send people to love you. He will send people to love you. Now, it's unfortunate that those people don't happen to be our family people that we expect to love us sometimes. That's hard, and that hurts. I know how deep that hurt is. But when he said that, the light bulb came on. And all I could think about was my school. And I thought about my teachers. And I thought about the little man in my neighborhood in the summer that brought the bookmobile so that we could read. I thought about the church that came in and did a little vacation Bible school so that we had some activities during the summer. I thought about Miss Saxon that had a little school in her garage during the summer so we wouldn't suffer from brain drain. I thought about all of those people that God had sent to love me, even when the grown folks that were responsible for taking care of me didn't do what they were supposed to do. He sent people to provide. And that's all my book is. It's just a story celebrating all of those people in my little small community, just like Hansville, that looked out for me, even when the grown folks that were supposed to didn't. And when I thought about that, faith came into my heart, and I went up that night and I professed Christ. And I began my spiritual journey of learning how to live my life through the Word of God. And I stayed on my natural journey of using education, the great equalizer, as my way to have a better quality of life here on earth as an adult than I did as a child. I used that tool, and it has been such a blessing because from preschool to law school, God always provided somebody to love me in spite of my situation. And He'll do the same for you. But you've got to make the choice. You have to decide that I'm going to take advantage of these resources that are in front of me, and I'm going to have a better quality of life as an adult, no matter what has been dealt to me as a kid. No matter whether or not anybody in my family's ever been to college or ever had a professional career or ever done anything, I'm not going to let that define who I'm going to be as an adult. And even if they have, and you got that support system, you need to be darn grateful for it. And you really have no excuse. Actually, none of us do. Look at my story. You have absolutely no excuse to do whatever it is you want to do in life. You're sitting in an institution of higher learning. The resources are there for you, and it's up to you to use them. Thank y'all so much for having me today. I hope that I've said something that at this time, I'll be happy to answer any questions. No questions? This is a first. Yes.
Do you still have time to practice law with all your traveling and speaking?
You should ask my law firm that. No. It is harder. When I was in New York yesterday, it was a rare occasion that I was actually out of town on legal business, instead of doing advocacy work. I've been very blessed that my law firm has really have a fond appreciation for the outreach that I do and the advocacy work that I do, and they've been very supportive and allowed me a lot of leeway to be able to be gone and do what I do because, I'm a litigator. I try cases for a living, and that demands a lot of your time, both in and out of the office. So I've been real blessed that they let me do it. But I do represent the Alabama Department of Early Childhood Ed in a couple of cities and a couple of companies where I still do their work for them. But it has really scaled back tremendously since I started this advocacy work. Yes?
Is there times where you probably have people that test your faith with God, even if it's family or if it's someone you're speaking to as a motivational speaker? Do they sometimes say, do they ever try to get you to change your beliefs? And if they do, how do you go about that conversation?
Well, it happens all the time. It happened all through school, and it happens today, even today. But first of all, I'm a believer in respecting people's opinions. You know, I mean, you have an opinion, I have an opinion, that's fine. I mean, we all have our own, we all have to live in our own skin and lay our pillows on our head at night and feel good about who we are. And so whoever that happens to be for you, I respect that. I don't ever try to impose my views on people. But whenever folks come at me questioning my faith or my beliefs or whatever and what I rely on as my source of strength to get me through, I always say this to them. I say, look, you know, maybe I am wrong. What if I am? What if there is no God? What if all of this stuff that I've been doing has been for naught and we're all going to die and come back as some animal or something, reincarnation, if you believe in that, whatever it is. I always say to them, you know what? If I'm wrong, so what? Because of that belief, because of that strength that it gives me personally, I'm able to move forward and do the things that I do. Holding on to that, holding on to those principles that guide the way that I live my life in a peaceful, orderly, productive, empathetic way where I feel like I'm giving to society. So if I'm wrong and I go into the ground and I just go away as dust and that's it, so what? I haven't lost anything. But then I look at them and say, especially if it's an agnostic or an atheist or somebody, I say, but if I'm right, I'm sorry for you. I've lost nothing if I'm wrong. But they've lost a lot if I'm right. And so I just leave it there. Usually that shuts it down, you know. Just to make that point. Let me do you do you, I do me, you know. So that's normally how I handle it.
I have one more question.
Mm-hmm.
So, you talked about how you were excited to go to church because you got to get out the house. But once you did get out the house, you experienced God.
Mm-hmm.
But I just feel like what's your opinion on taking God out of school and taking prayer out of school?
Well, you know, as a person that defends this Constitution, I mean, I am a lawyer, I do believe in the separation of church and state. Because everybody's belief is different. Their belief system is different. And I don't think you might have a classroom full of kids that are Presbyterian, Baptist, you know, Catholic, all of these different faiths. And so it's really hard, I think, if we were to try to blend church and state to come up with some uniform approach that would cater to everybody's belief system, whatever that happens to be. And that's part of my respecting us individually, respecting our individual rights, our liberties. That's what this country was built on. You know, a person's right to practice their faith however they choose to. However, you know, that's why we have faith-based schools in this country. So for people that choose to want their children to be in an environment where that is a big part of the curriculum, then those options are there. For example, both of my girls, they went to a Christian, a faith-based elementary school for elementary before they transitioned into public school, because I chose that. I wanted them to have that, but that church school had my system of beliefs. And so I was able to select that. So I think if we get to a point where a school, a school that's state run is now sort of dictating a person's set of beliefs, I think that goes and flies against what this country was completely built on. However, with that said, I do think we are founded on a nation that's one nation under God, and that there should be an acknowledgement of that because it's what we're founded on. I think that people should be given an opportunity to express their beliefs in a setting at the school. And, you know, and you see schools do it through Fellowship of Christian Athletes and other type of extracurricular activities that allow children to be able to join together, witness to other students, bring them along, and that kind of way. So I think we've done a good job of that balance. And I think it's for that school system to decide if they're going to pray before a football game or, you know, or whatever it is that they choose to do and not have the state dictate to it. And if you look closely at the law, I mean, that's really how it is. I mean, a school is sort of allowed, you know, the pastor in that church later ended up adopted me when I was in high school, and my alma mater, Chilton County High School, we got about 800 kids there. Well, last year they did my book as the school book, the common book. Every year they pick a book, and the kids read the book, and they try to expose them to the author. And so my pop was running into people in the community saying, "Oh, my daughter brought that book home, and I read Liz's book, and it's such a book of faith." And because I witnessed, I give my testimony in the book, and my dad told me, he's like, "Elizabeth, look at that. God is in schools through you, through your story." So I think God is in schools every day through us, through how we live our lives, our witness to people. It's certainly, we're not restricted from being able to do that, but I don't think it should be formalized as part of curriculum. Yes?
I was just curious, were you able to reconnect with your siblings, or were you ever able to come back together?
Oh, absolutely. We talk regularly. I just talked to my sister yesterday. We went our separate ways and had separate outcomes in our lives, but we all kind of stayed connected and spent time with each other from time to time. My younger sister lives in the community with me, but that traumatic experience of how our parents bailed on us really negatively impacted all of us in a lot of different ways. My brother being the worst. He ended up, not long after my mother died, getting out into the streets, dealing drugs, and by the time he was 16, he was found suspiciously drowned in the bottom of a body of water. So it affected all of us differently, but me and my other 3 sisters, we're all still in touch with each other. Yes, with the hat on.
So why a lawyer, why not a teacher or a therapist or something?
So I'm getting to kind of do that some, but she said, why a lawyer and not a teacher or therapist? When I was in the 6th grade, I had this history teacher named Mr. Art Smith. Now, let me just, and so I'm going to describe him to you guys, because never think you know how God is going to reach out to you to approach you about something or to look out for you. He'll use sometimes the most unsuspecting people. So I'm in the 6th grade, and this history teacher I have, Mr. Art Smith, he is a 5'1" white male. He's got dark hair, horn-rimmed glasses. He always wears dark pants and a white button-down with a pocket protector. And he was a tough disciplinarian. Y'all get the picture, right? Y'all know that kind of hardcore teacher. But he was a great history teacher. All the students just hung on his every word. And I loved to read because of Miss Pam Jones. That was instead. And I read all the time. Well, by the time I got to the 6th grade, I really didn't know what to read anymore, because nobody was guiding me or telling me what to read. But I could read on such an advanced level. I started reading stuff like Stephen King and Dean Koontz, and they write all the scary stuff, right? And I read those books for 2 reasons. One, in those books, somebody had a worse life than me. And number 2, I read them because they did make me escape into reality. So I always had one with me. Well, one day, the bell rings for us to change class, and Mr. Art Smith stops me and says, "Elizabeth, come here." Yes, sir. So I go up to Mr. Art Smith, and you know what he said to me? I had a Stephen King book in my hand. He said, "Every time I see you, you're always reading all that crap. Why are you reading all that crap all the time?" And I said, "Excuse me, Mr. Smith, that crap." He's like, "Elizabeth, you have so much potential. You need to be reading biographies." He said, "You need to be reading about ordinary people that did amazing things." Now think about that. Mr. Art Smith didn't have to do that. So what did I do? I went to the library to get a biography because I knew I wasn't going to show up in his class without a biography in my hand the next day. And naturally, I went to the African American section and I perused through the books. And the very first book I picked up was Maya Angelou's "I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings." And from there, I read biography after biography: Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and then I read all the black folks. I started reading the white folks, Helen Keller and Eleanor Roosevelt and everybody. And what I learned through all of those books, not only did they inspire me, but they taught me that the significant change that happened in society always happened through law. Unfortunately, in this country, sometimes we have to be made to act right, don't we? And the vehicle we have to do that with is law. And I wanted to be an agent of change because I've been such a victim myself. So being in a legal practice gives me that fluidity, if you will, where I can kind of have my hands in a bunch of different pots that affect a lot of different people. That's why I chose law. Well, thank y'all so much again for having me, and y'all have a great rest of the school year.